Welcome to episode 61 of the Liz McMullen Show. I'm welcoming back my guest, Tara Thomas, who writes under T.T. Thomas. And I thank you for returning to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So you write one of my absolute favorite genres, and that is historical fiction.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear it. I thought no one was reading it.
Do you know, I'm sure it doesn't get like the same level of press that other contemporary romances do, but I find it fascinating. And I grew up with my father as a historian, and I've always loved the History Channel and going to museums and visiting countries, and I'm captivated. There's one thing that I have a special request for all those authors of historical fiction. I'd love to have a Renaissance historical fiction piece.
Oh.
I would love something like Dangerous Liaisons, but
yes.
Wouldn't that be hot?
Oh, that would be... Oh, that hot is an understatement. Yes, that would be great. Now, there are a couple, not in the lesfic grouping, but do you remember reading a book, I think it was called Cry to Heaven?
No.
About the eunuchs, and a eunuch fell in love with a noble woman.
Mm-hmm.
It was about the castrati. Sorry.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. That's in Italy, and I believe that Justine Saracen.
Yes.
She wrote a novel in that time period, including the castrati.
Yes, I think she did. But yeah, it's one of my favorite times too. I'll have to go back. I've been stuck in the late 1800s and into the
early 20th century.
20th century. Yes. Because my father flew in World War II. In fact, that's how he met my mother. She was Irish, and she had come to London to do war work. Her sister brought her, and at that time, most young women would do almost anything to get out of Ireland. So my aunt brought her to London and got her a job, and she almost single-handedly blew up the whole country because they put her in munitions, and my mother didn't know left from right. I mean, she was always going backwards when she meant to go forward. I don't know what that's called, but she had that. Open milk cartons on the wrong side, the wrong end, open cereal boxes upside down. It was hysterical. But it wasn't so funny during World War II. So from World War II and my father's interest in genealogy, I have worked backwards through World War I, and before that, to the Victorian era,
mm-hmm.
In England and in the United States. And The Blondness of Honey, which was my first full-length novel, takes place around 1895
mm-hmm.
In California.
So, one of the things that since I haven't read all of your work, but the things that I have read, your novels tend to be longer, and your pacing is different as well. But I think I said off air that it's very indicative of the time, things that were written in the 19th century and the early 20th centuries, but more so Victorian or antebellum. And I love the book The Count of Monte Cristo, but that sucker's long.
Yeah, it is. Yes, some of my favorite authors are Wilkie Collins, Raphael Sabatini, and a young man who passed away a few years ago, Michael Cox, who writes in the voice and the theme and the cadence of Wilkie Collins, he wrote 2 or 3 books that I absolutely loved. And I had already begun to write The Blondness of Honey. Mm-hmm. And I find that when you're writing in the era, for me anyway, I tend to write in the same way that the books were written then. Mm-hmm. I think that's what you meant, isn't it?
Yes. And the other thing is with the second novel, well, the novel that I reviewed for this episode is A Delicate Refusal.
Yes.
And one of the things that is the nature of interaction is, letters were long, and they were well thought out, and also communications between people happen differently. And
very differently.
Over the years, as communication has changed from telegrams to telephones, radio, television, the internet, everything gets more and more shorthanded and compact. And you ask a lot of your readers, not in a bad way, I think it's an important way, that they need to take their time and watch your stories unfold, and it takes patience, because
it does, yes.
Because these days, and there's nothing wrong about it. It's just a hallmark of our generation that I'm sure somebody else is going to be writing about, like the texting rather than calling, and I like that. I think books should transport you, and if you're writing a historical novel, you need to feel like you're there. And oddly enough, I had someone on the show, and she was reading the story. And even though the story was kind of set in the 40s or thereabouts,
right,
it still felt to me that it could have been Victorian. Like, even though there was the interaction between the two young women, and the difficulty of life is determined by whom you're going to marry at a certain age,
right?
And the expectations of young ladies to find themselves an eligible bachelor, and the tension that creates for lesbians who fall in love with each other, and then, like it or not, have to share their lover with a man, or they just break up in general when those relationships start.
Right. Well, the Victorian era had long tentacles that stretched far beyond the numerical years that we associate with the Victorian era. Even into the 50s and late 50s, it was a very Victorian in its sexual repression. Mm-hmm. The early days of television, you couldn't show a man and a woman in bed together.
I know, they were in twin beds. I remember.
Twin beds.
Do you remember the big deal about the Brady Bunch when they actually shared a bed together?
Right.
That was racy, intense, and almost didn't get past the censors.
I'll tell you what I like about. How did you put it? When you get transported back to another era. Mm-hmm. I really think that it does a great job of teaching us that there's very little new under the sun, mm-hmm. and that history does in fact repeat itself.
And there's the earnestness of youth, and I hope I'm remembering your novel and not another historical set in Mills. Mills is actually fairly, it pops up in a lot of lesbian fiction. It's a women's college in the West Coast.
Right.
And I remember, if I'm remembering Laura correctly, or it's some other character, and will just forgive me, and there was a dizziness and a silliness about her, and I think she knock into Catherine?
She did.
Okay.
She was.
So I'm remembering correctly. I'm actually reaching back to the depths of my memory to the correct story.
You have a good memory. Yes, the opening scene in The Blondness of Honey is the somewhat irrepressible Laura Hastings, walking pell-mell in her billowing harem pants around the campus of Mills. and going so fast, she ran right into Catherine Chadwick, who was carrying a load of books that was so high she couldn't see who was coming either. Pardon me.
Laura seemed so incredibly excitable and dramatic and all this kind of thing. And I had to remind myself, they're girls, Liz. They're girls. And girls were more girls back then. And what I mean by that is as like the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and whatnot went on, the naivety factor decreased. So that by the time either in high school or college, very worldly, very understanding of all the different things, even though their impressions are wrong about what's appropriate and should be done, et cetera, et cetera. But they're very young. And I think that that's important to experience, to see Laura just, crestfallen when things are not working out, or just like soaring with love and fluttering about and being with her, what's it called?
Well, it's like the Gothic novels that our mutual friend Patty Henderson does. Everything is somewhat overstated to pull out that drama, and the people of that time were actually like that. And you read today, you get someone who doesn't even really write in cursive anymore because there's no need to.
They're not teaching it either.
They're not teaching it, and apparently there's no need to write it. I still think there might be good cause to be able to read it, but anyway, where was I going with that? Something about, but anyway, you have to pull out that drama.
I like it, and even though I guess the way that I'd explain a reading experience, there's some times where you want to be, breathlessly moving forward. And this can happen like in a thriller or a detective novel or even a contemporary romance. And when you're going to sit down and read certain historical novels, and I believe this is true for yourself, this is more, I'm going to be sitting down with like a cup of tea or a cup of coffee in a comfortable chair and visit another time and place.
That's it, exactly. It's I write the kind of things that do demand some of your time. Hopefully the reward is commensurate with the investment. I really get into my characters and my story. My personal opinion about Blondness of Honey is that it was a bit overwritten. Some might even disagree about a bit, but it was my first novel, and I'm happy with it. I think I sped things up a bit because the world began to speed up a bit in my subsequent things. And, now I'm writing, right now, I'm working on two projects. One is kind of what I call fantasy air punk, which is like steampunk, only there's airplanes involved.
Okay.
And another one, and the other one is it doesn't have a name yet, but it's an adventure story. So, the history in that one is a little less important, although there is plenty. For A Delicate Refusal, I really had to do a lot of research on World War I. I know a lot more about World War II.
So one of the things that I did want to talk to you about regarding A Delicate Refusal was the device that you used. I wanted to know, you definitely did a lot of research. How did you determine what quotes or excerpts you were going to use before each chapter? And do you feel like it closely correlated with the contents of the letters and the interactions between the characters of that particular time?
Right. I had about 50 60 different quotes, and they loosely followed the timeline
Okay.
of the beginning of the war, and they certainly were quotes that I chose because if you were living at that time, they conveyed the kind of information that would cause a great deal of anxiety in the populace. The people were aware and yet not aware. There was still the naivete of the Victorian era. When England went to war, World War I, the general populace had absolutely no real idea of the damage that the nerve gases would cause to their fighting people. Things began to leak out, bits and pieces of information, before war was actually declared. That only served to raise the anxiety. And so, although one theme of the book is the fear of intimacy that is experienced by the two women, it's the fear of intimacy in conjunction with the absolute free-floating fear and anxiety of impending doom that came from the war thing.
The other thing that sparked me, the first moment that I read it in your the beginning of the book, was, the late 1800s, the early 1900s was the birth of psychology in a lot of ways.
Right.
And when you mentioned the hysteria and the new treatments, I know the kind of treatments of which they speak.
Yes.
And they are so vulgar. And I just like how... I've even seen films where, the stodgy old mom was getting it on with the doctor,
right?
Because they believed that inducing orgasms would help mental health.
Well, that was one way.
I'm sorry. It just immediately, I just find it so disgusting. But it's interesting that all these, vibrators and whatnot were created, and it was like wink, wink, nudge, nudge, say no more, say no more.
Exactly. Well, the thing is, when the war first started, the commanders did not believe that the soldiers were suffering from what we now call post-traumatic
stress disorder.
They thought they were malingering. And so it was actually the French psychiatrists and psychologists and the French attention to mental health that first discovered that the soldiers were trying to recover from, closed head wounds, among other things, as well as hysteria and fear. Well, the women were doing the same thing at home, the ones who weren't in the war effort, but who had people in it, or anybody in England was involved. And it was, so with the advent of, war problems and mental health solutions, also came the advent of the so-called frigid woman. And generally the attitude was, well, if she doesn't, if she doesn't want sex, doesn't like sex, doesn't respond, then she's frigid. It was her problem.
Absolutely.
And so it's actually the intersection of the two kinds of problems: the more personal, intimate fears, post-traumatic stress disorders between two people, and the larger thing that was happening in the war effort.
The other thing that just occurred to me right now, that the term hysterical blindness.
Right. Hysterical blindness is what one of the characters has. There were many manifestations of hysteria, and among the ones that were physical and documented at that time was a kind of blindness, a kind of paralysis, a kind of mutism, where someone wouldn't speak or spoke in a very hoarse whisper. All of these were reactions to trauma of one kind or another. And so what we have here in A Delicate Refusal is a woman who can't see very well is in love with a woman who can't move very well. And so they write letters.
Where did you come with the Cyrano angle to that?
Cyrano would write the letters to why did her name Rosamund just left me, but that was the basis of the letter of the story. Cyrano would write love letters to a woman for another man,
and I don't know if this is like a play version, but that he would whisper words to the man, and the man would speak it aloud.
Exactly, that's Cyrano de Bergerac.
Okay, there we go.
And that's and actually the quote is by the author of Cyrano. But I've always liked Cyrano. I've always loved the play, and the whole idea of somebody else writing somebody's love letters, just and quirky like that. So anyway, in A Delicate Refusal, the one who's somewhat blind, Rosemary, she has to hire somebody to write her love letters and to read the ones that are sent to her. And that sets up
I thought it was kind of I was surprised at the level of acceptance involved with like her psychiatrist, and also with the young woman writing lesbian love letters.
Right. Well, I mean, it was far more acknowledged and understood than our history books have led us to believe. I mean, after all, the reader, January Jameson, she had her own situation with a boyfriend, and she had become pregnant, and she had that cross to bear, and her mother never let her forget it. But the whole prevalence of lesbians and gay men was very, very much present.
Especially, I mean, for the men, especially in the military. There are tons of stories about men getting together while being in combat with each other.
And as much as things have been discovered, such as Anne Lister's diaries, which were written in code, and the whole Romaine Brooks and all of them, it seems people are constantly stunned, and I'm talking about present day lesbians and others, to discover that these people actually did exist, and not necessarily in small numbers either. During the times that I write about, and as far as the other earlier periods, we always find one another. We find one another. So
I'm addicted to the candy that is lesbian paradise books, where people find each other, or they're in, even though it's not like a utopia, but so many books are written where almost all the characters are lesbians. I'm like, lesbians everywhere for everyone. You get a lesbian and you get a lesbian.
I mean, Most of the straight writers have to get a lesbian.
I know. Goodness
I know,
gracious.
to get a bestseller. But yeah, they.
Oh my God.
Gay people in general were far, far more prevalent than history, than most of the.
I get a kick out of those photo albums that they post on different articles with people dressed in a certain manner. And I would have loved to have experienced France in the 20s and 30s.
That was a pretty wild time.
Yeah, not just the flappers, but just, I find historicals fascinating because oftentimes they show what women had to do in order to get the freedom that they desired. And some of these women who would move away, didn't want to be married and move away from the small towns or wherever they felt constricted to the big cities. Some of them made their way by being on dates with men and otherwise, not necessarily prostitution. But there was a lot of behavior that women were trying to work within what was possible. And now, because women can have whatever job they so desire, even though there's still obviously misogyny out there, there are choices. But back then there were not as many choices, and that was a part of what the angst and stress that they had to go through.
Right. Well, one of the most interesting periods of time to me is in Germany between the two wars, between World War I and World War II. Another author, Elena Graf, has written a fabulous book called Occasions of Sin. And she combines that period of time with Catholic nunnery, Catholic nunnery. And that's always, bring up the nuns, bring up the wars, show us the lesbians. And it's pretty...
Get thee to a nunnery.
Yes, get thee to a war front or a nunnery.
It's like
or a girls' school.
Yeah, I went to a women's college and a Catholic girls' school for high school.
Mount Holyoke?
I went to Mount Holyoke, yes.
Yeah. I went to a Catholic school and girls' school, and I had Dominican nuns. And Jesuit.
Oh, me too. I went to St. Dominic Academy.
Yeah, so we had,
You and I have very similar...
good education and horrible experiences.
Well, I mean, the Dominican nuns and the Jesuit priests, those are the ones that, you got in contact with mostly for education.
Right, exactly. But, so yeah, I had a very good education that way. However many scars it left, because I actually went to a Catholic grade school for 8 years. So
corporal punishment was still allowed at the time.
Yeah, punishment was high on the list of things to do each day.
I still, it was so funny. Years later, I went to my high school. I think I needed to pick up transcripts for my master's application, and there was this one area that only the nuns were allowed in, or the teachers, and it was called Madonna Hall. And one of the things was, like, it would have been convenient for students to go through the doorways from one end to Madonna Hall to the other to get to classes, but you weren't allowed to. You had to go around it. And I still remember walking past the disciplinarian's office and looking down at my skirt to make sure that it was the proper length and that I was tucked in and all that stuff. And it's that vigilance. And then I went to Madonna Hall as an adult woman. I was in my late 20s, and I was like, this place is small. I don't know why it was so large looming in my childhood.
Yeah, it was frightening because we were small. We were small, and they were big, and they had impressive uniforms. Oh, gosh.
Oh, my goodness.
So, but yeah, I think I write historical romance for the very reason that or the very comments you brought up, observations, that you do have to immerse yourself give it a little time, get lost in an era, and immerse yourself in a culture. And then you have a very different experience than you have texting your bestie.
You know, totes me goats. One of my absolute favorite ad campaign is where James Earl Jones, and I can't remember the other guy, but he played Caligula. And there's these, like, it's almost like these elder statesmen of phenomenal acting were reading all these different text messages between people, and it is just so wonderful because
that's great.
Because they do it in this almost Shakespearean manner, and it's just, you know, like, it's little things like I told you to special private message me, and now we're doing this in a thread we weren't supposed to.
I know. I have one of my new books that I'm working on. I have it's time travel, a bit of it, and the two people time travel from like 2011 or 12 or 14, whatever, back to the 1800s. But they don't lose the way they speak. So it becomes this, situation of talking to people who don't understand you. It's going the other direction. But it's like people now reading something that took place in 1895. There's an adjustment, you know.
Well, and like you said, even if you're not taught how to write in cursive, if you're going to be looking at primary resources, which means like things that are for that time period, like the actual document of like the Declaration of Independence,
right?
You're not going to be able to read so many different great either political, historical, or even literary pieces because you won't be able to recognize how to read it, and it's a shame because you'd be missing out on so much. I want to apologize for that abrupt stop there. Tara and I got a bit off topic, and so I took out that portion of our discussion, and now rejoining the part where we were talking about writing lesbian fiction as a career. Even the most prolific lesbian fiction writers have to have day jobs.
Absolutely.
Nobody is making a full-time living off of it, and if they are, it's because they're retired and they have a nest egg and they may be doing really well and selling well. But
I do think, however, that some people are woefully unaware of what's going on around them in terms of their fellow writers' income. And I mean, I did see something, somebody said they sold X amount of books. They didn't know if it was good or bad. And I think the feedback I'm getting is that most of the people who read that would like to sell that. You know, and this is a nice person who said this, so it wasn't anything,
it wasn't look at me, I'm awesome. It wasn't a look at me, I'm awesome. It's like, is this normal or?
Right. And I was a little surprised at how that author couldn't know that that's really pretty remarkable. That she was doing that well, but I think, Liz, it's like sex. Money is like sex. Nobody wants to talk about it.
Well, I'll tell you one thing, and like I don't have a name like other authors have a name, but I self-published my short story. It's only been out for about a month. Yeah. And I sold, and it's not like a lot, I sold about 70 copies. And you want to know how much I made even self-publishing, getting the biggest cut? I've made $20.
Right. No, I know. I got my I got my 1099 from Amazon and Barnes and Noble and Create Space. You know, and I mean, what I earned, I spent triple or quadruple that publishing my books.
Publishing it, promoting it.
That's what I meant. Publishing it, promoting it, giving them away, hiring editors, you know, all the stuff that, formatters that goes into it. And, so you pretty much better love what you do, and I do love it, because if I didn't have a full-time job, I would not be able to do this.
Exactly. And, you know, I think it's important to talk about the money because even those who are doing very, very well, you know, are very popular, they still go to all these conferences and travel for readings and have to give out free copies or mail things. Like I did this giveaway, and one of my winners lives in Canada, and instead of it costing me $17 like that box would have cost if I did a flat rate box, it cost me $45.
Oh, I know. I just sent to Canada myself.
And I was just like, oh, I was not expecting that. And it's so funny because, like, even though I was sharing books that I did not pay for, it was almost like the cost of sending it. And, you know, I know for a fact, you know, on my end, I asked for ebooks. But there are many people and reviewers who ask for paper copy books, and free books are going out all the time, but those free books are not free. The authors or the publishers are swallowing the cost on that.
Right. No, I know. Well, I absolutely would be astounded if anybody in Lesfic is making over $50,000 a year in income. I'm not talking about expenses right now, just income. And I venture to say that the majority of people are making $3,000 or less in a whole year, probably publishing 2 books. Now, if they have 8 or 10 books out, maybe that goes up to 5. Okay. There are a couple of fairly well-known exceptions. But, you know,
by and large, it's just not the case. And, you know, I think it's important for people to know. Even another component for folks who, you know, mainstream publishers. Even the mainstream publishers or places like Bella who publish and distribute, they're not rolling in the dough. And let's say, like for me, I've been spending a lot of money trying to advertise my story and also trying to advertise my brand. It's like the Liz McMullen Show. There's these bedtime stories, and I've spent hundreds of dollars on this, and
I've spent thousands.
It's because you have your book out and whatnot, and publishers have to swallow up lots and lots of money and pay lots of money for, you know, promotion, and even and when it comes to publishing, it's a what have you done for me lately kind of thing. Yeah,
well, you know, it's all in the numbers. I mean, really, you know, if you can make $3,000 a month selling Lesfic, that means, I mean, and let's say you get $5 a copy. Most people get 3 or 2. But at $5 a copy, you'd have to sell 600 books. Almost nobody does.
Exactly.
Okay? So, you know, that's...
And they may in the first 3 months, but that tapers off.
Yeah. But then people say, I'd like to have $3,000, you know, a month. Well, you know, that's rare. My point is, I mean, I think most people make $100 to $250 a month. I would bet you a triple venti latte that 95% of Lesfic writers make less than $200 a month. 95%, and there must be 1,200 of us or less, but 1,200 times 95%. is 1140. So maybe 60 people are making more than 200 and a month. And they might be making 3,000, 10,000. I doubt it, but some of them might. But no, that, you owe me a coffee. That's all I know.
Exactly. I was just, and one of the things that I think is important about my show is not just for me to talk with the authors about the things that they've written, but also to inform not readers and authors alike, or aspiring authors, what it means and what it looks like. I mean, if you think about, like, let's say you went to the conference at GCLS and it cost you maybe $300 for an all-access pass, then maybe, depending on where you're traveling from, maybe between $300 and $700 for your round-trip flight. And if you're staying in the hotel, it's at least $100 a night, and you have to eat. So this is all this money, and a lot of people go to promote their books and whatnot. So there's so much money going, like, rushing out of pockets, much more than it's actually going into pockets.
Well, I can honestly tell you, Liz, that every dime I have made in the last 3 years, I have spent buying other people's books. Mm-hmm. So that means that all the money I spent getting my stuff published and the formatting and whatever, editing, that came out of my own pocket. It did not come from my earnings. Mm-hmm. My earnings have gone to support, to pay it forward, as they say.
Yeah. So
all I have to say is it's a good thing for Mercedes-Benz because I work there and I could not do this if I didn't. Mm-hmm. So.
And you even have a song.
Song?
Well, for Mercedes-Benz.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, Mama, won't you buy me a Mercedes-Benz? My friends all drive Porsches, I must make amends. Thank God for my life and the help of my friends. Oh, Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes-Benz?
I have a cold. I can't sing when I don't have a cold.
So yeah, the listeners, you just got to hear me sing. Woo!
I knew that. I knew that before we started. I was going to get you to sing. Next, you're going to be wanting the Mercedes. I know how it works.
Yeah, I'm just buttering you up, Tara.
Just shipping on over.
Oh my God. We've talked about a lot of important things, and there's the craft of writing. There's talking about historicals and the research that you need to do and the tone of writing and the pacing and whatnot and what attracts you to it. Also, the all important money.
What do you think about erotica?
What do I think about erotica? I like it.
I'm just kidding.
I like it. I'd be total hypocrite. I just, my erotica has absolutely no plot to it. Not like so it's just like I can't say anything. But all in all, I've enjoyed having a conversation with you, Tara. I never know what's going to happen on any episode.
I know. Well, am I anything close to what you imagined?
I didn't have any preconceived notions other than that you like history. Yeah.
Well, I have listened to many of your recordings, so I had a little bit to go on. I knew you were a lot of fun.
Oh, thank you. You've been a lot of fun, too, and you have a very sexy reading voice. And for those of you listening, by the time this comes out, or shortly after, you'll be able to hear her read quite sexily some historical angst, ennui, and love for Lizzie's Bedtime Stories Valentine's Special.
I can't wait.
So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me, and I hope you have me back on your show again. It's been fun.
Oh, of course.